You're very welcome. Mr. Bachus, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Gutierrez. Just last night, Chairman Frank released a memo. I'm sure you've probably seen it to his caucus when he suggested changes to the Consumer Financial Protection Agency. And specifically, the chairman intends to drop, or seems to, the plain vanilla requirement, which has received so much attention. It was sort of the white paper by the administration highlighted that. I know Elizabeth Warren, who first proposed a Financial Protection Safety Council. I think that was the sort of the main impetus was that plain vanilla. And it's in the draft legislation that the administration sent to the Hill. What's your position on leaving out plain vanilla? You didn't mention it this morning.
Thank you. I've read the note quickly, and in general, we're very supportive of the changes proposed by the chairman, including the one you referenced. But let me just explain the basic rationale for where we started. Our basic framework is designed to use disclosure to make sure consumers are less vulnerable to predation.
Of course, now, you know, Mr. Secretary, about 18 pages of the present disclosures are because of federal requirements.
No, I agree, but I think as anybody realizes, how many of you read those disclosures and understand what they mean?
No, I agree with you.
I think it is really a remarkable failure to provide the kind of ability to choose that's so central to any reasonable financial system. So, in general, Mr. Bachus, we think it's a reasonable idea to try to make sure consumers have the ability to choose a simple product, not something to understand, and maybe probably the most effective way to do this to make sure you get disclosure right.
Okay. Although, you know, a lot of the disclosure is because of federal regulation. I mean, so that's the reason.
But you said something that I often say and completely believe, that in many ways this is about smarter regulation, and you know what you cite in disclosure, an example that you can have a lot of requirements and not achieve the objective of clarity.
Sure, I agree. Okay. Your testimony on page 8, you spent a lot of time this morning on the systemically significant, the Tier 1. You say that the identification of a firm as a Tier 1 will not convey a government subsidy. But isn't it a fact that a firm that has been identified as Tier 1, just that identification tends to imply a government subsidy, given that creditors will know that the firm has been determined to be so important that it can't fail?
We are deeply worried about that risk. And you are absolutely right, as is the chairman, to point out the risk in any regime that creates the expectation that the government will be there if you screw things up. But let me just make it clear what's important. It is very important that these institutions that matter, whose future could threaten the economy as a whole, are subject to higher constraints on leverage in the future, more conservative cushions of capital and liquidity so that they can absorb losses they face when they make big mistakes. So what we're trying to do is to make it clear that if you have this particular source of threat to the system, we're going to hold you and subject you to more conservative constraints on risk-taking. Now, you can't do that without identifying who those institutions are. But you have to do it in a way that doesn't, as you said, create an expectation that the government will be in there to fail. But that's why you can't just do it with tighter capital requirements. You have to give them the tools for the government to not to intervene to save them, but to act in a way that allows them to be dismantled and restructured, and I won't use the chairman's language, again, without the taxpayer assuming that burden. That's the central imperative for reform, and you are all right when you say that the key thing we have to do is not reinforce any expectation that the government's going to step in and protect people from losses in the future. Our job, though, is to make sure the system is less vulnerable to the collateral damage that can be caused when people make big mistakes.
Can you assure us that the government won't step in if they fail?
Mr. Bachus, as I said, we had a little natural experience as a country last fall in what happens when...
It wasn't so little, I would say.
No, I didn't. I would just say we had a test of the proposition
Right.
that you can solve a crisis by hoping it's going to burn itself out. And you saw how deeply damaging it was to the country as a whole. So you can't fix this system, make it more stable in the future by hoping and promising that you're going to, how should I say it?
Not have more bailout?
Abolish the fire station.
Time of the gentleman.
Lock
has
the doors of the
expired.
fire station when the crisis breaks out. It's not a strategy that will work.
Time of the gentleman has expired.